Welcome to another Edge of Your Seat installment of Dr. Fixmaster. We are going to recharge an air conditioning system today, and I've got a vacuum pump out there getting the job started right now, and I'll explain as I go. All these hose connections should be finger tight. It's very important that you, if you have any coolant left in your system, when you put up you can put these gauges on, open up the lines, and well, actually these will be closed because you just want to get a read on the pressure. These will be closed because this just opens up the path to the center yellow hose. But you can have that closed and you still get a pressure read on your line. So you want to get a pressure read on your line before you do any work to make sure that if you do have a leak, that all the stuff is gone, all the coolant is gone from your system. And if not, you have to have someone certified, you have to take it to a mechanic to have them empty the system of coolant and recover it. You can't release that into the atmosphere, so that's one important thing to remember. If it's already gone, like in my case, you can work as you see fit, and then when you're all done, you just need to evacuate the air and recharge it. No special recovery equipment needed. Step one is to evacuate all of the air from the air conditioning system. So you can see I purchased a vacuum pump. Make sure you have the special adapters that you need to hook up your manifold gauge set. You're going to need one of those to do this. Right now I've got both of these open, which provides a path to the yellow hose, which is being evacuated right now. And all the connections, you have to locate your high and low side. Usually they're fitted so that you can't swap them, you can't get them wrong. So right now these are open, this is open. I'm pulling a vacuum on both the high and the low side. When this gets down to about minus 30, that's when you're done. That's when you've pulled a complete vacuum in the system. So with the pump running, you turn off these connectors like this. That will seal everything off. Close it off, because what you want to do now is test for leaks and leave this for about an hour to make sure the pressure doesn't change. Once you've got those shut off, you can turn off your pump. You might encounter frustrations if you have a leaky gauge set or leaky hoses or connections out here, which was what happened, what looks like happened in my case. I evacuated the system, closed off these openings to the center line that was pulling a vacuum, just to test to see if I had any leaks in the system. And I had a leak in them somewhere, so I could see the needle, I was losing my vacuum. And just as an experiment, I pulled a vacuum on it, got it back to where it was, and I closed these, as well as on the Harbor Freight set there was also an adjustment down here, so I closed these off just to test my hoses, and I could see the gauge I was losing my vacuum, so that told me that I was losing vacuum somewhere in my hoses and connections on that Harbor Freight set. This is a really nice Robinair set, and I see no leaks here at all, which is encouraging because that means I don't have to go digging into the contents of my AC system to find out where a leak is when it's actually my gauges that was the problem. The other test that I used to see if I could determine whether or not my gauges were leaky or my air conditioning was leaky was I turned off these connections. After pulling a vacuum, I turned these off. I turned the ones off on my Harbor Freight set down here, and I let it sit for about an hour. And then I turned the vacuum pump on again, pulled a vacuum, made sure that my gauges were all at the minus 30 point or close, and then I once I got the vacuum pulled in the hoses, I opened these up to make sure that I had full vacuum in my hoses. And the test was, once I got that vacuum established, I turned these off again, turned off my vacuum pump, and it was holding vacuum. And I wanted to test to see if the leak was somewhere down inside the air conditioner or in my gauges. And so with that setup complete, I undid the connections down on the Harbor Freight set to expose the vacuum in the lines to the vacuum in the air conditioning system, and there was no change in the needle, which means that if there was a leak in my air conditioning system, it would have shown up as a pressure drop on the gauge. So that gave me a little bit of a clue that there wasn't actually a problem in my AC system, but was just the hoses and connections. Now, I'm really impressed. I've waited a little bit, and so far my vacuum hasn't changed at all, which means I probably don't have any leaks in the system. These nice Robinair hoses don't have an adjustment right here, or a valve where I can turn them on and off, which it's catch-22. To have it there, like on the Harbor Freight set, it gives you additional debug options to test various things if you can shut it off right here at the connection. But you also, every time you have a valve or an adapter, you have more connections in the system that can go wrong. So I kind of see the value in having a system where there's a minimal number of adapters and valves in the system. So that's probably one of the reasons why these nice Robinair lines are not leaking. It's pretty easy to find something like this online. It's an R134A temperature pressure chart. The ambient temperature right now is roughly 80 degrees. So it looks like, according to this chart, I need 40 to 50 psi on the low pressure manifold gauge and 175 to 210 on the high pressure side. And then it's got a little diagnostic table that you can pause on and look at for debugging according to what levels you're seeing. So I'm just going to add coolant now. This needle right here hasn't budged in about an hour. It just needs to be long enough to convince yourself that there's no leaks in the system. And the big leaks is what you mostly worry about, because then you got a major problem. If there's a small leak somewhere, hopefully it seals off well, but if you don't have any idea where it is, you may have to put some UV dye in your refrigerant. I buy the kind that has the UV dye in it already, so that if you have a minor leak somewhere, it will show up under UV light. Alright, I'm going to use my can with the UV dye in it first. It says to shake the can well, and then to sort of tip the can upside down and shake it around gently while you're adding the refrigerant. You want to do that slowly. You don't want to overwhelm the system. I've heard that you can damage the compressor if you do it too quickly, if it goes in liquid. So put it in slowly. This thing screws down in to puncture for the needle in here, and it punctures the top of the can seal. And then as you unscrew it again, it opens back up and starts filling the system. So I'm going to go ahead and do that until my gauges here read in the proper ranges. You do this with the engine running. First I'm going to evacuate the line though. I'm going to connect the can up and push on that Schrader valve until I've purged all the air out of the system. That's pretty easy to do. After that I'm going to start the engine, because it has to be running when you do this. And then I'm going to add the refrigerant, open up both of those. Let's say not both of them, just one of them. This is just to monitor the pressure. So you leave that one closed, because you want from the yellow hose to the blue hose, that line to be open. You're going to add the refrigerant on the low pressure side. Alright, the car is running now. I've turned the AC on maximum. I'm going to puncture the can and do what I told you I'm going to do, purging the line, and then I'm going to immediately start loading it in. And what will happen is there's a pressure switch over here, right down in there, And as soon as it detects enough pressure, it will allow the compressor clutch to engage. Right now, you can see down there where that shiny bulb is, right where my finger's pointing, that is showing that the compressor is not engaging right now, even though the AC is on. So as soon as that pressure switch engages, that'll start to turn, and the compressor will run as we fill the system. When the pressure switch goes, you'll see the low side gauge drop when the compressor turns on. And then as you load it, I've loaded one can with the UV dye in it. I'm supposed to be between 40 and 50 on one side, and between 175 and 210 on the high pressure side. So you can see I need to add a little bit more. Now remember that this is under pressure, so before I switch cans here, I need to come over here and lock this off. Make sure both of them are off. This one's off already, but I need to turn this one off because I don't want anything coming out of this hose when I disconnect the can and hook it up to another can. And I have to purge the line the same way I did before. I'll go ahead and shut this because I think this one's completely done now. You can feel the can getting cold as it empties. Alright, I've emptied the second can. Low side range says 40 to 50, but I'm getting 35. But on the top end it says that the top of my high pressure range is 210. 210 is the highest. So I'm getting pretty close to that, so I'm going to stop adding. But I've only got 2 cans anyway, so this is where I stop. This is interesting. I've got about 35 on the low side and about 225 on the high side. So 210 was supposed to be the maximum, and I was supposed to get between 40 and 50. According to this chart right here, it says that if I have that situation, low on the low side and high on the high side, it says needs service. Possibly blockage of the expansion valve or orifice tube. Well, I just barely put a brand new expansion valve in there. So it's not leaking. I know it's not blocked because it's brand new. I checked all the hoses as I was assembling everything, so I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to go inside and test the temperature of the air and just see how it's doing. It's not too far out of range, so I'm inclined not to worry about it. Well, the cabin is blowing Arctic air right now, so I think we're done. That's at 40. That's on the low end of on the 80 ambient side. 175 to 210 is actually for 80. 225 to 250. So I'm at 250 there. So I'm on the low side on one, high side on the other. The temperature varies. Plus the ambient is rising. It's probably about 85 ambient now. The car's in the sun. But I think we're in range, so we're good. Thank you for watching.